Michael Jordan mocked Jimmy Butler's intelligence. He thought he could silence him, but Jimmy's silent and meaningful response was enough to shake the entire NBA. Before you find out what Jimmy Butler's response was, take a second to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like this video for more basketball stories. It was one of the most critical seasons in NBA history. Teams were battling it out on the court, but the real war was being waged behind closed doors. The Round Table Summit between the Players' Union and the league management was setting the stage for a historic moment. The venue, NBA Owners' Round Table. Local and national media had their eyes on this room. The cameras flashed, and the name leaning into the microphone was that of a legend known to all, Michael Jordan. He was no longer a player, but a respected advisor to the NBA, a club owner, and the big brain. Around the table were star players, team owners, and media representatives. But on that day, all eyes were on one person in particular, Jimmy Butler. Jimmy had recently defended the right of players to speak out off the court and had taken a clear stance against the league's new disciplinary guidelines. The media called him too bold and too political. Now he was being silenced in front of everyone. During his speech, Jordan suddenly turned to Jimmy and smiled at him, but there was obvious mockery and contempt in that smile. "Butler, I don't know how much of this you understand, but this meeting is not just about basketball. It's also a place where big issues are discussed." His voice echoed unexpectedly. A murmur arose in the large hall. Some young players looked a little tense, while some media workers were seen putting down their pens. The ESPN camera immediately zoomed in on Jimmy. What they wanted was for Jimmy to get angry, respond, or even lose control completely. But he didn't do what they expected, and didn't even move from his seat. He just bowed his head and placed his black sports bag on his knees. He opened the zipper and took out a small, worn book with curled corners. NBA Collective Bargaining Agreement, CBA. This was the official contract between the players and the league management. As he placed the book on the table, he picked up his pen and he began to speak. "Actually, that's exactly why I'm here." His voice was neither loud nor angry, but the calm determination in his tone hit everyone like a slap in the face. Article 12, Paragraph 4 of the CBA clearly states, "Players have the right to express their thoughts and opinions off the court. This includes social issues, personal comments, and professional evaluations." Jordan paused for a moment. His expression changed. The other big names at the table, the media representatives, and the young players were all focused on him in deep silence. "The new regulation you are proposing violates this right, because it is not only contrary to the text here, but also to the spirit of the sport." Jimmy opened the booklet and pointed to the underlined lines. "And don't forget that we all signed this text. That includes you." Everyone in the room could feel the atmosphere change. A media consultant looked as if he was about to stand up, but sat back down. A young player looked at Jimmy, his eyes shining. This was not a challenge, of course. It was just a reminder. Jordan's lips seemed to want to say something, and he even muttered a few words. But unfortunately, he couldn't finish his sentence. For the first time, words seemed inadequate. It was not the power of words, but the weight of his stance that defined this moment. Then a journalist wrote the following lines. "Jimmy Butler made history not by protesting with angry words, but by speaking with documents." Jimmy clasped his hands over the CBA. His eyes were on Jordan, but his spirit was with the children growing up in the stands, in the locker rooms, and on the muddy street courts. "If we want unity, we must first learn to respect rights, because a player's voice cannot be limited to the court." With those words, Michael Jordan leaned back and stepped back. "Okay, let's change the subject. You've said what you wanted to say." But no one was listening to him anymore. The attention in the room was no longer on Jordan, but on Jimmy. That day, the C-SPAN sports channel broadcast those moments live. There was no Zoom. There was no dramatic music. Only the raw truth was there on that broadcast. A clear picture of how a star basketball player shone with his stance outside of sports. Jimmy Butler hadn't even risen above the crowd on that stage, but he had made much more noise than those shouting at the table. When the meeting ended, no one wanted to leave right away. There was an awkward silence in the room. Jordan's team bowed their heads. Advisors gathered their files, but their eyes were still fixed on Jimmy. Everyone at the table knew very well that this was not just an answer, but a shift in the balance of power. Jimmy slowly got up from his seat and put the copy of the CBA back in his bag. He didn't look at the cameras or wink at the press. He just walked forward, calm, head held high, as if he didn't have anything to prove to anyone. But of course, the world outside had not stopped. As soon as those moments appeared on live TV, social media was already ablaze with this spark. A video clip began with Jimmy placing the CBA on the table and saying, "We all signed this document." Someone had written a single sentence underneath. This man didn't speak. He solved a game. In a short time, the video broke records with millions of views. Montages were immediately made on TikTok. One slowed down Jimmy's voice and reposted it with piano music in the background. Another added it to the archive of the most unforgettable moments in NBA history and showed Jordan's silence in slow motion. Thousands of young players shared that sentence on Instagram. First, we must learn to respect rights. In a small gym in Miami, a young coach gathered his team in front of a screen before practice. "Look, kids," he said, "whatever this man did, he did without raising his voice. This is how power is used." Meanwhile, in a sports agency office in New York, Marcus Ray, Jimmy's personal manager and closest advisor, put his phone down on the table. ESPN was on one side, Twitter was scrolling on his tablet, and urgent notifications were popping up. He turned to his assistant who had just entered and said, "We didn't want this, but this is getting big, and this is no longer just a player story." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Jimmy entered, holding a plain coffee, still wearing his clothes from the morning meeting. His face was tired, but relaxed. "Did you watch it?" Marcus asked. Jimmy shrugged. "No need to watch it. I already know what I said." Marcus nodded in agreement. "It's not just you. Now everyone knows. In just 3 hours, you got 4.2 million views from just one account. ESPN went live. The TNT announcers are talking about you non-stop. Players are sending you private messages, and team owners are avoiding commenting, but everyone is watching non-stop." Jimmy sat down at the table. He took out the CBA. His fingerprints were still there on the booklet from when he left it that morning. "I didn't speak today to go viral. I just wanted to be clear enough to silence that room. That's all," he said. Marcus looked at him. "That's why you're growing so much, my friend." But this attention also brought with it silent threats. One of the league executives had told him to think twice before talking to the press. Some media figures had begun to describe Jimmy as too confrontational. Others implied that he brought more controversy than leadership. But Butler had heard this before. On the street, in the gym, in the locker room, and in many other places. He had always been too serious, too clear, too independent, but he had never been bothered by being too much. Because for Jimmy, the right measure had always been the spirit of the game. The next morning, Marcus entered the office with a tablet in his hand. Jimmy was still in his uniform. He had just returned from practice. Sweaty, tired, but his eyes were focused. "Look at this, buddy," said Marcus. On the screen was a special email from the NBA commissioner's assistant. It was a polite but clear warning. It said that Jimmy's comments could be problematic in terms of league integrity and that a code of conduct reminder was on the agenda. Jimmy read the email, but without saying a word, he just smiled and took out the CBA again and wrote a single sentence on the booklet with his pen. "Silence in the face of noise sometimes brings the loudest voice." Marcus broke his silence. "Are you going to talk again? Because the press is looking for you. ESPN wants an exclusive interview, and TNT wants you on the air." Jimmy shook his head. "Of course not. Not yet. Not anymore. Let them talk. I know this game." But Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. This silence was the calm before the storm. And Jimmy was the man who remained calm in the eye of that storm. But the outside world, which he didn't care about, was not so calm. A document leaked from the league office had already made its way to the media. The statements it contained were quite striking. In accordance with the disciplinary protocol, public statements will be re-evaluated. Of course, no names were mentioned. but everyone seemed pretty sure who was being targeted. Early in the morning, a panel discussion began on ESPN. The anchor turned to the studio and said, "Jimmy Butler didn't want to talk, but it looks like the NBA is uncomfortable with his silence." One of the guests, a former player, shook his head in disbelief. "The man just showed a document. Are you that fragile?" The other anchor immediately jumped in. "The balance of the league is important. If everyone says what they want..." He hadn't even finished his sentence when footage of Butler putting the CBA on the table appeared on the screen. The studio fell silent for a moment. Then the announcer slowly continued. He was silent, even while doing this. He just showed it. And the strange thing is, he said a lot more that day. Later that day, Marcus Ray entered Jimmy's room. He had his tablet in his hand again, and on the screen was a caption. "The player, who is in tension with management, continues to walk toward leadership with his silence." "What do you think about this, Jimmy?" Marcus asked. Jimmy shrugged his shoulders hopelessly. "You don't have to talk much to be a leader. You just have to use the right words when the time comes." But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Some sponsors had already begun quietly reviewing their endorsement contracts. Some media moguls were also voicing their concerns that Butler was too political. A league executive had even remarked in a private meeting that he was walking the line of disrespect. Late that night, Jimmy sat in the empty gym after practice. His uniform had long since cooled from sweat. He had a notebook in his hand. He opened the page and wrote a short note. "Respect is not obedience. The true voice comes from silence." When Marcus entered the gym, Jimmy was still in the same position. He asked slowly, "Are you ready? ESPN will be waiting for you on live TV in the morning." Jimmy looked up. "I'm ready, but I'm still thinking about staying silent." The next morning, cameras were set up in the ESPN studio. The lights were ready, and the microphones were adjusted. The host began in a strong, serious voice. "We have with us today someone who is as well known for his recent stance as he is for his achievements on the court. Welcome, Jimmy Butler." Jimmy nodded in greeting. His eyes were not looking directly at the camera. It was as if he were sitting on a rickety stool at the edge of a sports hall rather than in a studio. The host asked the first question. "Some see you as a figure who pushes the boundaries of the NBA. Was it planned to expose the CBA and question management, Jimmy?" Jimmy replied without hesitation. "Of course it wasn't planned, but it was just as necessary. When I sat down at that table, I knew very well that I wasn't representing myself, but hundreds of players. It was necessary to protect the spirit of the game." The host continued. "What about the criticism, disrespect, being overly political, and discrediting management? What do you say to that?" Jimmy paused for a moment, then bowed his head slightly. "I read the CBA rules one by one. They are not my feelings. They are an official contract between me and the league. If showing that is considered disrespectful, then we need to redefine respect." There was a moment of silence in the studio. Even the host was at a loss for words for a moment. "Many young people are watching you, Jimmy. What would you like to say to them?" Jimmy leaned back in his chair. He spoke in a calm but sincere tone. "They don't want you to shout, because they think they can control you. But when you stay calm and speak with knowledge, that's when they're afraid. So read first, then speak, and speak not out of fear of being silenced, but out of the weight of truth." When the interview ended, social media was once again almost out of control. This time, it wasn't just the sports world, but people from different disciplines were sharing Jimmy's words. A historian tweeted, "The phrase, 'respect is not obedience,' is not just about sports. It is essentially a call to action." In the evening, Marcus was back in the office. A comment was displayed on the screen. Could Jimmy Butler be the Jackie Robinson of this era? Jimmy hadn't seen the comment yet because he was in a small gym at the time. He had taken off his shoes and was kneeling down with the young players, talking to them at their level. "If you've been watching me," he said, "look not just at how I play on the court, but how I stand off the court. Because the real game is sometimes played where there isn't even a ball." And the children nodded their heads in agreement without saying a word. The silence that echoed in that small gym began to spread throughout the city. Jimmy's stance was no longer just a crisis within the NBA. It was becoming a symbol, not just a symbol of basketball, but a symbol of the right to speak. Late that same night, Marcus stopped by Jimmy's office. He had a yellow envelope in his hand. There were a few words written on it in handwriting. "My friend, this letter is for you," he said. Jimmy took the envelope. Inside was a folded, lined school notebook page. The letter was written in pencil. The edges were a little smudged, but the words were still legible. "Dear Jimmy Butler, I watched you on television. There has never been anyone like you at our school. Sometimes my teacher tells me, you ask too many questions. But you remained calm, even in front of that big man. I will remain calm, too. I will read, too. Signed, Trey, age 12. Jimmy's eyes were fixed on the letter as he read it. Marcus was silent. He didn't want to disturb the moment. Finally, Jimmy carefully folded the paper. He put it in the small black box on his desk and muttered quietly, "This is why I have to keep talking to these kids. But sometimes it's not easy to speak up, especially when people are organizing to silence you." That week, the NBA Board of Governors held an emergency meeting. The agenda was clear: statements and behavior that are contrary to the integrity of the league. Some media outlets had started calling it the Butler Clause. No official punishment had been announced yet, but information leaked from inside the organization suggested otherwise. Some executives argued that Jimmy should be punished. Others said that it would only make him bigger and turn him into a hero. That same day, Jimmy's agent received a notification. An investigation has been launched by the League Ethics Committee. Marcus couldn't hide his anger when he read the news. He opened the office window and took a deep breath. When he turned around, Jimmy was standing there, watching him silently. "They've started, haven't they?" said Jimmy. Marcus nodded yes. "Jimmy, they're about to issue an official code of conduct against you. They say you publicly questioned management and undermined the values of the league." Jimmy laughed, but his laughter was not out of anger. He was just tired and determined. "I didn't attack anyone. I just said what I knew. If that's the truth and it bothers some people, then maybe the problem is with me." Marcus picked up his tablet from his desk. There were thousands of comments on the screen, and they were all behind Jimmy. "With all this support, are you thinking of backing down?" he asked. Jimmy shook his head. "I'm not playing a role. I'm just being myself. And these kids, these cities, even everyone sweating it out in this hall, speaking up for them is something I can never back down from." But other signals were coming from within. Some club owners had sent instructions to their representatives to avoid any media appearances with Butler. Several advertising campaigns had even been withdrawn. One of Jimmy's sponsorship deals had been quietly and calmly suspended. The official statement he received read as follows: "Our brand advocates a stance that encompasses all sides. Therefore, we do not wish to be associated with statements that could be perceived as biased." When Marcus showed him the message, Jimmy said only one thing: "I'm not the one who's biased. I'm the one who's right." The next day, Jimmy made an unplanned visit to a public school in one of Miami's inner-city neighborhoods. The students were stunned. Most of them didn't even think to take out their phones. And Jimmy entered the classroom. He pulled up a chair and sat down. Naturally, he spoke directly to them, without a stage or press. "I was just like you. I was one of those who wanted to say something but didn't. But then I realized that when I remained silent, only they could speak." A child raised his hand. "So how do you feel when people say bad things about you, sir?" Jimmy looked into the child's eyes and said, "At first I feel sad, but then I think to myself, I must be doing something right if they feel the need to talk about me." That night, when Jimmy returned home, he placed a copy of CBA on his bedside table, and he stuck a note on it. The note contained a single sentence: "It's not those who shout the loudest who change the world, but those who know how to be in the right place." Jimmy couldn't sleep that night. He didn't turn from side to side in bed. He just sat there. In his hand was the little CBA booklet, and next to him was Trey's handwritten letter, and on the wall was a dim nightlight. Of course, outside, the world was still changing. The next morning, the NBA Ethics Committee meeting was scheduled. It was decision day. All eyes were on that room, but of course, all ears were on Jimmy. Marcus knocked on his door early in the morning. His face was tense. He immediately showed him the notification on his phone. "The decision will be announced at 8:00 p.m. today. However, the league officials are not calling you there, but you are invited to a live broadcast on a program. If you want, we can cancel it." Jimmy shook his head. "No way. Of course I'll go there. But as always, I won't raise my voice. On the same day, ESPN Prime, a special program, had already announced that it would be hosting Jimmy Butler live on air. The program's introduction was short and to the point. The calmest but most influential voice rising from within the NBA is with us today. Tonight, he won't just talk, he'll stand, and where he stands will shake. As the hours passed, social media turned into a boiling pot. Some names from within the NBA also tweeted their support for Jimmy. Others remained cautious, but no one could remain silent. It was 8 p.m. The Ethics Committee had finally announced its decision. Jimmy Butler has received a written warning for publicly criticizing the league's internal order. The disciplinary process has been completed, and no further sanctions will be imposed. The words were carefully chosen, but they certainly did not hide the truth. Yes, the league had completely backtracked. At the same moment, Jimmy entered the studio. His face wore a familiar expression. He was neither angry, nor tired, nor proud, just ready. The host opened the program. As the decision was announced, Jimmy Butler is with us. Welcome, Jimmy. Jimmy greeted him with a nod. The host continued. In just a few days, silence turned into leadership. So what was this silence, in your opinion? Jimmy clasped his hands on the table, and his gaze was clear, as always. This silence was like talking alone in a room full of people, but without shouting. Because I never sought attention, I only sought meaning. The host moved on to the next question. What about the decision? The league issued a warning. Will that silence you? Jimmy shook his head. My word is greater than the warning, because I didn't say anything ordinary. I showed the documents. I revealed what we all signed. They didn't punish me. They approved me. Towards the end of the program, the host showed a special letter that had been sent to the studio. This is one of the hundreds of letters you received, he said, sent by a girl from Ohio. She says she was afraid to speak up at school, but after watching you, she's not afraid anymore. Jimmy stared at the letter without looking away. He just took a deep breath and said, I didn't come here to talk. I came here to play. But sometimes the game ends and only the people remain. And if people talk about each other, the rules change. When the program ended, the cameras were turned off, but outside, the echoes continued. The next morning, the NBA's official social media account posted a new message. The image showed Jimmy's famous moments in the studio. Underneath was a single sentence. Some players score points. Others make history. When Marcus saw the post, he ran over to Jimmy. Did you see that, buddy? He said. Jimmy smiled. Of course I did. But this isn't a score. It's just the beginning. That weekend, Jimmy didn't appear on any shows. He didn't make any press statements, and he didn't sign any sponsorship deals. Instead, he went to a school gym again. In his bag, he had his worn CBA and Trey's letter. The gym was empty, but Jimmy was there. He walked up to the basket. He took the ball and shot it. The ball went through the net. And maybe no one saw that moment, but Jimmy did it on purpose. Because some shots carry a message, not a sound. If Jimmy's silence has awakened something in you, share your thoughts with us in the comments, and send this story to a friend and ask them what they think.